Imagine this. You wake up in your apartment, the same beige ceiling overhead, the same hum of traffic outside, the same blinking router light casting shadows on your wall. But something is off. Not dramatically, not in the movie scene, lightning strike sort of way. It's subtler, a low existential frequency that trembles beneath your thoughts. You look around and everything you once dreamed of having, your degree, your job title, your curated bookshelves and fitness routines, feels like a prop from someone else's life. You've arrived at the place you thought would feel like you, and yet you don't recognize yourself in any of it. Where did the spark go? At 32, you're not lost in the chaos of youth. You're functioning, responsible, maybe even admired. But inside, there's a quiet war being waged. A war between what you built and what you truly need. Between who you said you'd become and who is silently screaming beneath your skin. No one warns you about this moment. They tell you your 30s are about stability, maturity, arriving. But what if arrival feels like entrapment? What if the map you followed leads you to a locked room? They don't tell you that reinvention isn't a youthful rebellion, it's a psychological necessity. That in your 30s, the architecture of your identity starts to creak. That the dreams you inherited, sometimes unconsciously, begin to rot at the roots. And the frightening part, you might not even notice it happening. You'll just feel the slow leak of meaning. The career that once thrilled you now feels like a costume. The city that once sparkled with possibility becomes a loop of routines. The relationships, romantic or platonic, once forged with wild fire, now carry a quiet fatigue, like they're mimicking a script you're too tired to rewrite. You might feel guilt for even feeling this way. Because aren't you lucky? Aren't you better off than most? Shouldn't gratitude drown this rising dread? But gratitude, while noble, cannot anesthetize a soul that's starving for depth. So you stay busy. You optimize. You buy self-help books, start a podcast queue about productivity, go on soul-searching hikes, maybe even take a sabbatical. Yet deep inside, the question still echoes in the dark chambers of your inner world. Whose life am I really living? This isn't about failure, it's about success. Success built on unconscious choices. You did everything right, and yet something is wrong. What do you do when your life looks good on paper but feels hollow in your gut? You might try to blame external things, the economy, your job, your partner, your city. But late at night, when the distractions settle and the room falls quiet, another suspicion creeps in. What if the real problem is how I constructed myself? It's a chilling thought that maybe what you need to shed isn't a job or a zip code, but an identity. That maybe the version of you who built this life is no longer the one who can live it. But who are you without those labels? Those polished stories you told at parties, the skills you mastered to win approval, the persona you've curated to survive. To question your identity in your 30s feels treacherous. It's the age when you're supposed to know, not wonder. Wondering is for 20-somethings with open tabs and bad credit. But now, you're supposed to be the stable one, the reliable one, the one who has answers, not existential questions. And yet here you are, asking the question you swore you'd never need to ask again. What am I becoming? And more disturbingly, what if I don't want to become what I set out to be? This is the paradox of the third decade. It demands both continuity and transformation. It punishes deviation from the path you once chose, yet suffocates you if you refuse to evolve. Society hands you a blueprint, but never tells you what to do when the architecture of that blueprint begins to crumble from the inside out. So you do what many do. You postpone the reckoning. You distract. You double down on your existing identity, hoping it will start to feel real again. But it doesn't, because something deeper is shifting, not just in your preferences or circumstances, but in your psychological core, like tectonic plates rearranging beneath the surface, unseen yet inevitable. And here, in this subterranean space, you are not alone. Across the world, millions of people in their 30s are quietly breaking down, intellectually functional, emotionally numbed, spiritually depleted, performing success, mimicking happiness, achieving goals that no longer make sense, all while feeling like ghosts in their own lives. So the question becomes urgent. What is this hidden force that turns stability into stagnation? And how do you escape it without burning your life to the ground? To answer that, we must go beneath the surface of psychology and into the roots of the human psyche itself, into the shadowlands where identity is not built, but deconstructed, into the invisible tension between becoming and being. Because if you don't reinvent yourself now, life will do it for you, and it won't ask your permission. There's a moment in Carl Jung's work where he describes the individuation process, a psychological journey not toward perfection but wholeness. It begins, he says, not with clarity, but with a crisis, a collapse. The persona we've built to survive society no longer fits the soul it was meant to protect. This, Jung believed, is not an error. It is a necessity. And nowhere is that necessity more pressing than in your 30s. You see, the problem isn't that you've failed at adulthood. It's that you've succeeded at someone else's definition of it. To understand why your 30s feel like a slow unraveling, we need to explore what exactly you've been unraveling from. Let's go back to your 20s when identity was like clay, unformed, malleable, responsive to the pressures of culture, ambition, and fear. In that decade, you absorbed messages like oxygen. You internalized values not because they were true, but because they worked, because they earned praise, because they made you feel visible. Success was defined externally: job titles, marriage, financial milestones. Your value was mirrored in LinkedIn bios and Instagram captions. Life was a forward motion, and motion felt like meaning. But all of this, Jung would argue, was the persona, the mask we construct to fit the collective. And at some point, usually in our 30s, that mask begins to suffocate the very self it once protected. Because the persona, by design, is a simplification. It edits out your contradictions. It prunes your wildness. It rewards what is predictable and punishes what is real. You were never taught to live from the self. You were taught to perform it. And performance, while seductive, cannot endure the slow weight of time. Philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "We are condemned to be free." It's a haunting idea, that you and you alone are responsible for crafting your essence, not discovering it, but choosing it. Yet from childhood, society tries to relieve you of that burden. It hands you scripts, labels, expectations. It tells you who you should be before you even know who you could be. By the time you reach your 30s, you've spent over a decade constructing a self based on these scripts. But deep down, you begin to suspect something. What if the scaffolding that built my success is the very thing imprisoning me? You feel it in moments that seem harmless, an inexplicable apathy toward your career, a hollow smile at your own accomplishments, a strange envy not of wealth or status, but of people who've let it all burn and started over. It's not failure that haunts you. It's the fear of having succeeded at the wrong things. Arthur Schopenhauer, the brooding German philosopher, believed that human desire was a form of suffering, that we chase goal after goal, illusion after illusion, in a futile attempt to silence the will. But he also suggested that transcendence was possible, not through conquest, but through deep introspection and renunciation of the false self. This is what makes your 30s so dangerous and so powerful. You are standing at the threshold between the life you were conditioned to want and the life your soul is quietly demanding. But why now? Why does this crisis erupt after you've already invested so much? Because reinvention requires friction, and friction only emerges when your inner world outgrows the roles you've been playing. Think of it like a snake shedding its skin. Until the outer layer becomes unbearably tight, the snake doesn't move. Comfort, paradoxically, is what delays transformation. In your 30s, comfort becomes a trap. The salary is decent, the relationship is functional, the apartment is pleasant, and yet it all feels almost right, which is more dangerous than wrong. Almost right is how people waste decades. This is the hidden problem. You are caught between the momentum of your old self and the emergence of a new one. But the old self is loud. It has data. It has metrics. It has the approval of your parents and your friends and society at large. The new self, it speaks in whispers, in restlessness, in discomfort, in quiet longings you can't explain. And most terrifying of all, it asks you to let go of what's working. Let go of a career path you mastered. Let go of a relationship that's fine. Let go of a self-image you've spent years defending. It asks you to walk into uncertainty without guarantees. This is why so many people ignore the call. They rationalize. They double down. They numb themselves with entertainment, ambition, substances, spirituality as distraction, anything to avoid the gaping sacred silence of the real question, who am I without my roles? Aldous Huxley warned of a future where truth is drowned in irrelevance, where we are not oppressed by censorship, but distracted into submission. That future is now. In your 30s, this distraction becomes especially insidious. You can hide from your inner crisis in plain sight by being productive, likable, busy. But beneath the noise, the psychological unraveling continues, and if you ignore it long enough, it becomes depression, apathy, emotional disconnection, a slow, creeping burnout that no vacation can cure. Because it's not a break you need, it's a breakthrough. And that breakthrough begins not with new answers, but with deeper questions. What parts of yourself have you abandoned in order to be acceptable? Which dreams were yours and which were inherited? What if the anxiety you feel isn't a flaw, but a compass, pointing you toward an unlived life? These are not rhetorical games. They are existential detonations, and they only grow louder in your 30s, because the self you constructed in your 20s was never meant to last forever. It was scaffolding, necessary but temporary. To remain inside that scaffolding now is to suffocate, but to step beyond it is terrifying. It means confronting the void. It means admitting that your life, despite its apparent success, may not be built on truth, and yet in that confrontation lies something rare and sacred, the possibility of real reinvention, not a pivot, not a rebrand, but a return to the self you buried beneath survival, to the soul you silenced to be liked, to the questions you postponed because the answers might require you to burn everything down. And so the tension grows, because now you see the problem, but not yet the way out. It doesn't happen in a single moment. There's no dramatic collapse, no sudden reckoning. That's the problem. The consequences of avoiding reinvention in your 30s are slow, stealthy, and devastatingly quiet. Like carbon monoxide, they fill your life without color, taste, or sound, until one day you can't breathe, and you don't remember what fresh air ever felt like. You still show up, you smile, you respond to emails, you hit the deadlines, but inside something essential is rotting. A decay that starts not with failure, but with subtle disconnection from joy, from meaning, from yourself. You don't lose your mind, you lose your aliveness, and it starts with what seems like harmless compromises. You say yes to projects that drain you. You stay in relationships that are emotionally neutral, not because they're bad, but because they're familiar. You stop creating, not because you lack time, but because your spirit no longer believes it matters. You start to confuse routine for purpose, numbness for peace, avoidance for maturity. Each of these choices whispers the same lie. This is just how adulthood feels. But it's not adulthood, it's psychological erosion. It's what happens when your soul hits the limits of a self you've outgrown, but your ego refuses to release control. And here lies the most sinister part. You might not even know it's happening. Your brain is wired to preserve the status quo. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for logic and planning, forms alliances with your limbic system to avoid perceived risk. And reinvention is risk incarnate. It threatens your social standing, your financial identity, your psychological comfort. So your brain does what it was designed to do. It defends the mask. It will rationalize your unease. Everyone feels this way. You're just tired. Wait until the next raise, the next trip, the next project. It will minimize your inner voice. Don't be ungrateful. You worked hard for this life. It will pathologize your awakening. Maybe you're depressed. Maybe you need meds. Maybe this is just anxiety. And while yes, mental health matters, sometimes what looks like disorder is actually dissonance, a soul screaming to be heard after years of being ignored. Behavioral psychology offers another clue: status quo bias. This cognitive distortion causes people to prefer things to stay the same, even when change is clearly better. Why? Because uncertainty is perceived by the brain as a threat, even if the current reality is miserable. Add to that loss aversion, the tendency to fear loss more than we value gain, and you begin to understand why so many in their 30s silently choose emotional extinction over the terrifying work of becoming someone new. But what's the price of this inertia? It's not just burnout. It's not just dissatisfaction. It's an entire existence that begins to fold in on itself. A flattening of inner space, a withdrawal from vitality. You begin to notice it in your language. You say should more than want. You say fine more than alive. You say maybe later to every part of yourself that feels too wild, too tender, too real. And then come the behaviors. You default to the same 3 takeout places. You scroll past beauty without noticing. You forget the last time you were moved by music. You sleep but don't rest. You laugh but it feels rehearsed. You cry but only in secret, and even then you don't know why. This is the consequence no one warned you about. Not that life would be hard, but that it would be unfelt. Cultural conditioning deepens the trap. Society sells you a myth in your 30s that fulfillment comes from refinement, not disruption. That you're supposed to settle down, grow up, get serious. That impulsiveness is immaturity and doubt is weakness. That to question your life at this stage is self-indulgent, even irresponsible. So you hide your inner revolution. You keep the rebellion quiet. A secret folder of ideas you'll maybe try someday. A late-night journal filled with words too raw to say out loud. A half-written resignation letter. A dream job bookmarked, never applied to. An imaginary version of yourself who paints, sings, travels, writes, but only exists in moments of insomnia and longing. And as the years pass, the walls close in. You begin to feel like an imposter in your own story. You perform happiness like a monologue, well practiced, emotionally hollow. And the scariest part, people believe you. They compliment your stability, your maturity, your success. They don't see the ghost behind your eyes. Neurologically, this disconnect has real costs. Chronic suppression of your true self increases cortisol levels, disrupts dopamine regulation, and shrinks the hippocampus, leading to impaired memory, low motivation, and mood disorders. You're not just emotionally depleted, your brain is physically rewiring itself around a life that no longer fits you. Eventually, the body protests. It speaks in tension headaches, digestive issues, insomnia. It tries to alert you with symptoms because the psyche's screams have gone unheard. Your body becomes the messenger for a soul in crisis, and if you still refuse to listen, life intervenes. You get laid off, a relationship ends, an illness arrives. Not because the universe is cruel, but because you've ignored every softer sign. So life turns up the volume, it shakes the snow globe. And in those moments, when your carefully constructed world shatters, you glimpse something dangerous and sacred, freedom, not the naive kind, not the quit your job and travel cliché, but the existential freedom that comes from realizing you can begin again, not because everything is broken, but because you are no longer willing to be. But you don't need to wait for collapse. You can choose to burn what no longer serves you. You can choose to step into the wilderness of reinvention, not as punishment, but as a pilgrimage. Because staying small is not safe, it's toxic. And nothing you built in fear can carry you into the future your soul longs to create. The unseen consequences are real, but they are also the door. And now the hinge creaks. The question isn't just what happens if you don't change, it's what might awaken if you finally do. There comes a moment, not always loud, not always grand, when the pain of staying the same eclipses the terror of change. It might strike you in the middle of folding laundry, or as you sit in a meeting, nodding at a conversation that feels like it belongs to someone else's life, or when you catch your reflection and, for a split second, don't recognize the eyes staring back. That's the moment the rebellion begins, not with fire, but with friction, a friction between who you are and who you've been pretending to be. Breaking free doesn't start with a plan, it starts with a fracture. You feel it first in your nervous system. The way your chest tightens when you say yes to something you don't want. The silent scream your body gives when you force yourself to be pleasant, competent, quiet. The surge of energy when you do something slightly wild, slightly real, something that cracks the script. That surge, that's you. And here's the radical truth. The version of you who can survive the next decade isn't the one who knows how to perform. It's the one who dares to become. The rebellion is not aesthetic. It's not about quitting your job and growing your hair or booking a flight to Bali. That's marketing. That's escapism with an Instagram filter. The real rebellion is internal. It is psychological, philosophical, existential. It begins the moment you stop negotiating with your fear. Fear says, don't rock the boat. The rebel says, let it sink. Fear says, you've come too far to start over. The rebel says, then I'll start deeper. Fear says, what will they think? The rebel asks, why did they ever get to decide who I am? Friedrich Nietzsche once said, one must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. The chaos you feel in your 30s is not dysfunction. It is gestation. It's your soul gathering the fragments of every silenced dream, every authentic instinct you buried under responsibility and reputation. But chaos must be met with courage, not the Hollywood version, not the one that slays dragons. The kind of courage that's quiet and repetitive. The courage to say no when it would be easier to comply. The courage to admit you don't know who you are. The courage to sit in uncertainty without sedating it with busyness, alcohol, or spiritual bypassing. This is not reinvention as self-help. This is reinvention as resurrection. Let's look at some of history's rebels, not the loud ones, but the soul rebels. Viktor Frankl, imprisoned in Nazi concentration camps, found purpose not in what was happening to him, but in how he chose to respond. He wrote, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Your rebellion begins when you stop asking the world to give you permission to live differently. Georgia O'Keeffe, dismissed by critics, isolated herself in the vast landscapes of New Mexico, not to escape, but to create. She chose solitude not as absence, but as deep presence with her art. She defied cultural norms not with slogans, but with quiet, relentless authenticity. James Baldwin, confronting racism and exclusion, said, "You have to go the way your blood beats. If you don't live the only life you have, you won't live some other life. You won't live any life at all." His rebellion was in truth-telling, in refusing to edit himself for the comfort of others. These were not people who fit the mold. They shattered it. They didn't find themselves. They forged themselves. In solitude, in contradiction, in exile. That's the real map of reinvention, not a step-by-step guide, but a journey inward, to the place where all your unspoken truths are waiting. So how do you begin? Not with clarity, that's a myth. You begin by listening to what makes you restless. That restlessness is not a defect. It's a compass. It points to the places in your life where you are living in contradiction. You begin by saying no, softly but surely, to the things you used to tolerate. Mediocre friendships, empty obligations, the slow drip of self-abandonment that comes from always being reasonable. You begin by reclaiming stolen instincts. When was the last time you did something just because it made you feel wildly alive? Not productive, not impressive, not useful, just alive. You begin by naming the things you've avoided, and then asking why you're still letting fear make decisions that belong to your future self, the one you haven't met yet because you've never given them the space to exist. And maybe most importantly, you begin by redefining failure. Failure isn't the job that didn't work out. It's the life unlived because you were too afraid to let things fall apart. Sometimes falling apart is the first honest thing you do. There will be resistance. Your ego will panic. Your loved ones might not understand. You might feel foolish, selfish, naive. That's good. It means you're getting close. The part of you that wants to be liked will try to interfere. It will whisper that being true to yourself is dangerous, that being fully expressed will cost you everything. But the truth is, you're already paying a price for pretending, and now the choice becomes clear. Either keep the life that impresses others, or build the one that feeds your soul. This rebellion is not loud. It won't always look like fire and fury. Sometimes it's just the way you speak differently to yourself in the mirror, the way you reclaim time to create, to wonder, to feel, the way you look at your relationships and ask, do they nourish me or drain me? And the way you begin, slowly, bravely, to choose what nourishes. It is a rebellion of becoming, of unbecoming every version of you that was shaped by fear and rebuilding a life rooted in truth. And if you follow that path long enough, if you walk through the silence, the uncertainty, the shedding, something extraordinary happens. You stop needing to be anyone but yourself. Not a projection, not a brand, not a title, just you, unfiltered, undiluted, undeniable. That is freedom, that is fire, and it's only the beginning. Because once you start to taste that kind of liberation, you realize that what you've been calling security was just a beautifully constructed prison. And now the walls are burning. So what do you see on the other side? You've burned the map. You've walked the perimeter of your own prison and found the door was never locked. You've said goodbye to masks that protected you, but also suffocated you. And now, silence, not the silence of absence, the silence of arrival. What now? You're standing in the clearing. The identity you clung to for years is dissolving behind you. There are no more familiar signposts, no more people clapping for the performance, no more applause for doing the right thing. It's just you and something vast, something you felt since you were young but couldn't name without sounding mad or mystical. The terrifying possibility that you are free, not metaphorically, not spiritually, existentially. And here comes the final paradox, that freedom is not lightness, it is weight, not escape, it is burden, not certainty, but a surrender to the abyss of possibility, because now everything is up to you. You thought the hard part was changing your job, ending the relationship, breaking the routine. You thought the rebellion was the peak, but the rebellion was just the door. The ultimate truth is what comes after the escape, the terrifying gift of full authorship. No more blaming your childhood, no more pointing to society, no more waiting for signs. There's no script now, only decisions, only desire, only the raw clay of your life in your own trembling hands. And suddenly, you understand what Jean-Paul Sartre meant when he said, man is condemned to be free, condemned because there are no excuses left, no divine puppeteer pulling your strings, just your own will, naked and exposed, trembling before the endless sky of what could be. This is where most people retreat. They don't fear failure, they fear freedom, because it demands responsibility at a soul level. It means every moment is a vote for who you are becoming. It means your life is no longer a reaction to circumstances, but a creation. So what do you create? This is where philosophy stops handing you answers and starts asking better questions. If no one were watching, what would you devote your life to? If comfort were no longer king, what would you risk for meaning? If your worth was intrinsic, what would you stop proving? You realize the goal was never happiness. That was just a side effect of alignment. The goal was wholeness. to no longer split yourself between the one who complies and the one who dreams, to no longer live half in, half out of your own skin, to no longer be at war with yourself. Wholeness is not perfection, it is integration. It's the ability to hold your contradictions without collapse, to carry your grief and your joy in the same breath, to remember who you were before the world told you who to be, and to love that forgotten version of yourself back into being. Carl Jung spoke of this as individuation, the lifelong process of becoming your most authentic self, by integrating the conscious and the unconscious, the light and the shadow, the saint and the sinner within. In your 30s, this process is no longer optional. It's a summons, a quiet, persistent call from the deeper layers of your psyche saying, "You cannot fake this anymore." And if you listen, you begin to realize the fear, the breakdowns, the discontent, it was never dysfunction. It was the soul awakening from anesthesia. And what does the soul want? Not security, not applause, not even peace. It wants meaning. As Viktor Frankl said, those who have a why to live can bear almost any how. The final realization is that reinvention is not about chasing a better version of yourself. It's about returning to your deepest why. That why is not found in books or gurus. It's in your fingerprints, in your obsessions, in your heartbreak, in the strange, inexplicable callings that keep returning, no matter how often you abandon them. You don't choose your purpose, you remember it. And now the world looks different. The job is no longer just a job, it's a container for expression. The relationship is no longer a transaction, it's a mirror. Your time is no longer a schedule, it's a sacred currency. You start to treat every day as a brushstroke in a masterpiece only you can paint. You start to see the poetry in the mundane, the revolution in the ordinary, the sublime in the moment you choose to sit with your discomfort instead of numbing it, to write the thing that scares you, to say the truth that costs you comfort, to live without armor, not because you've never been wounded, but because you're done living like a ghost of your own potential. And here's the final, most haunting truth. There was never a map, because you are the map. You were always the compass, the terrain, and the explorer. You were never lost, just buried, under expectations, under conditioning, under years of trying to be digestible to a world that profits from your self-abandonment. And now, at last, the fog clears. You see the terrain for what it is, open, vast, waiting. You see yourself for what you are, unfinished, fierce, alive. You feel the future, not as a plan, but as a pull. A magnetic force drawing you not toward success, but toward selfhood. And you understand, the 30s weren't a crisis. They were a threshold, not the end of youth, the birth of essence. You don't need more goals. You need a deeper orientation to choose again and again the path that costs you comfort but gives you yourself. That's the final rebellion. That's the ultimate truth. That's how reinvention begins and ends and begins again. Not in fixing, but in remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. Now the choice is yours. Will you go back to sleep, or will you walk into the fire of your own becoming and never look back?